Eli Decker leaned heavily on his wooden cane as he crossed the dusty ranch yard, each uneven step reminding him of the old wound that never truly healed. The afternoon wind rattled the dry grass, carrying with it a faint thunder of hoofbeats that made him lift his head. At first he thought it was a trick of the desert, but the sound grew sharper, more purposeful, like warriors riding with anger tucked beneath their ribs. A lone Apache rider emerged from the shimmering distance, tall and rigid on his horse, dragging behind him the red ceremonial feathers of his people like a banner of shame. Without greeting or pause, he stopped at the ranch gate and threw a battered body to the ground, as if discarding a ruined tool. A large Apache woman lay there, muscles thick as carved stone, yet her legs twisted unnaturally to either side, bruised and broken beyond recognition. When her eyes cracked open, they did not show fear, only the hollow depth of someone who had been abandoned more than once by those she had trusted. The warrior jerked his chin, his voice flat as dry stone. "She is no longer useful. I leave her with you." And without waiting for a reply, he kicked his horse and rode away, vanishing into the desert with a cloud of dust trailing him like a ghost. Eli stared at the woman now lying on his porch, confused yet strangely moved by something in her expression. He didn't know her name, her story, or the reason she had been cast aside by her own people. But in her eyes, in that dim flicker of exhaustion and pride, he recognized a loneliness he knew all too well. Slowly, he knelt beside her, his joints complaining, but his voice steady as he asked, "Do you want to stay here?" Her breath left her chest in a heavy exhale, and after a moment she gave the faintest nod. Eli hooked his arms beneath her battered frame and lifted with all the strength his aging body could manage, surprised by the sheer weight of a warrior built for battle, not fragility. He carried her inside, careful not to jostle her broken legs, and laid her gently onto the only bed in the small wooden cabin. It was a simple act, just a moment in a long life of quiet struggles, but somehow he sensed it was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. He covered her legs with an old blanket, watching them tremble with the pain she refused to acknowledge. Her jaw was set, her lips pressed tight, holding back any sign of weakness, as if even the slightest groan might betray her warrior spirit. Eli did not ask what had happened, nor why her own people had abandoned her. Instead, he stepped outside, took a knife from his tool bench, and began sawing several planks of wood to make splints, his hands steady with the calm focus of someone who understood suffering without explanation. Through the open door, her eyes tracked every movement he made, not with trust, but with a quiet acceptance that she had nowhere else to go. That evening he prepared a bowl of simple corn porridge and set it beside her, offering it without pity, without coaxing, just a plain statement: "If you're hungry, eat." She hesitated, unused to kindness that asked for nothing, then slowly raised the spoon with trembling hands. By morning, Eli was already outside constructing a long wooden ramp from the doorway to the yard, sawing and hammering with a rhythm that echoed across the dry earth. He said nothing about why he was building it and offered no explanation at all. But she understood. He was giving her a way to move, to breathe, to reclaim a sliver of freedom, something she thought she had lost with the breaking of her legs. As she watched him, she finally rasped, "Why do you keep me here? I am nothing but a burden." Eli didn't look at her as he wiped sweat from his brow and replied, "You wanted to stay." Her voice hardened with bitterness. "So what then? You plan to use me, warm your bed with me." Eli paused, raised his gaze, and answered with a calm steadiness she had never seen in any man. "No, I do not expect anything from you." Her breath caught. For the first time, she didn't know how to respond. That evening she pushed herself upright, using only her powerful arms, determined to handle small tasks alone, to eat without help, to arrange her blanket without showing frailty. Eli worked on a loose hinge by the door, pretending not to watch her struggle, though he noticed every movement, every wince, every flash of stubborn fire in her eyes. After a long silence, she whispered, "Why do you not look at me like I am broken?" Eli hammered another nail before answering softly, "Because you are not." She lowered her face, thick lashes hiding the tears she refused to let fall. She had never known kindness without pity, never felt seen without judgment. And in that quiet wooden cabin, she realized she had stepped into a place where strength and weakness could coexist without shame. Days moved in a steady, unspoken rhythm as she adjusted to life beside the man who offered help only when asked and silence when she needed space. Though her splinted legs burned with pain, her arms remained strong, and she used them to peel corn, braid cords, or patch worn tools with determined but clumsy motions. Eli let her do every task at her own pace, understanding that dignity mattered more than speed. One afternoon, while he shaped a new chair to better fit her size, she said quietly, "You treat me like I am still a normal person." Eli turned, his expression calm as still water. "You are a normal person." She gave a bitter laugh that cracked at the edges. "No one in my tribe believes that. A warrior with broken legs is worth nothing." Eli tapped his cane gently. "I was worth nothing to the army after the war. One broken piece does not erase the rest of who you are." For the first time, she let herself believe him. That day, she pushed herself outside, gripping the edges of the long wooden ramp Eli had built, hauling her weight forward with the raw strength of her arms. Sweat poured down her temples as she struggled upward, her breath sharp and fierce like a warrior refusing to bow to fate. When she slipped and nearly fell, Eli stepped forward out of instinct, but she thrust a hand toward him, ordering, "I can do it!" He froze where he stood, respecting her battle even when every muscle in his body wanted to help. Inch by inch, she dragged herself back into the chair at the top of the ramp, her chest heaving but her eyes burning with triumph instead of pain. "You always let me do things on my own," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Eli gave a small nod, knowing some victories had to be won alone. A silence settled between them. Not cold or uncomfortable, but the kind that grows between two people who understand each other without needing many words. That evening, the fire crackled inside the small cabin, casting warm light across her strong shoulders as she ate with more ease than before. After a long moment, she asked the question Eli knew had been forming behind her guarded stare. "Are you doing all this because you pity me?" Eli set his spoon down, meeting her gaze with unwavering calm. "No. You are not broken. You are just tired. Like me." The words were simple, but they pierced the deepest, most bruised corner of her heart, the place where she had stored every insult, every dismissal, every moment her tribe looked at her with disgust instead of honor. She turned her face away, but not fast enough to hide the trembling of her shoulders, a tremor not of weakness, but of something she had not felt in a long time: safety. The next afternoon, Eli was splitting wood when the earth began to tremble beneath the pounding of many hooves. The Apache woman stiffened instantly, her warrior instincts igniting like sparks beneath her skin. Eli saw the fire in her eyes and understood before she spoke they had come for her. 3 warriors rode toward the cabin with the swagger of men who believed they possessed power over everything they touched. The leader, the same man who had abandoned her weeks before, glared at Eli with disdain, his voice cutting through the wind. "You have kept one of ours for too long." Eli stepped in front of the door, leaning on his cane but refusing to move aside. He did not threaten. He simply stood. Behind him, she pushed the door open with her massive hands, her presence so commanding that even the 3 warriors hesitated. Seated in her chair, she was still a force of nature, her powerful shoulders squared, her voice cracking through the air like thunder. "I am not going back. You have no right to claim me." The lead warrior tightened his jaw, frustration simmering beneath his words. "You are a warrior of the tribe. When you heal, you must return and serve." She gave a cold smile, the kind born from those who have walked through fire and survived. "My worth was never yours to measure." Another warrior snarled, "You choose to stay with this crippled white man? Become his slave?" Her eyes flashed, and she straightened as much as her broken body allowed. "I stay because I choose to, not because of him, and not because of you." The leader's face darkened. "A woman with broken legs has no voice in the tribe." She leaned forward, her tone low and unwavering. "Then I am the exception. Tell your chief I am no longer his burden, and I am no longer afraid." The three men looked at one another, caught between anger and uncertainty. They could not drag her away, not with Eli blocking their path, and not with the way she glared at them like a wounded wolf, ready to strike with her last breath. After a tense silence, they pulled their horses around and rode off, swallowed by the swirling dust. Eli watched them disappear, then stepped back inside. She looked up at him, pride gleaming in her amber eyes. "They cannot take me anymore," Eli nodded gently, "because you no longer allow them to decide for you." And for the first time, she smiled a real, unguarded smile, a smile that carried the warmth of someone reclaiming her own name. That night, as the desert wind howled like a distant spirit outside the window, she watched Eli sharpen his knife, his movements slow and steady. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Yesterday when they came, were you afraid?" Eli paused, setting the blade aside. "Yes." She studied him for a long moment. "But you never left the door." Eli nodded. "I knew you wanted them to hear your voice. I stayed so they could not drag you away." Her broad shoulders trembled like the first rain hitting dry earth, because in her entire life, no one had ever stood beside her without expecting something in return. Eli, a man with a limp and nothing but quiet loyalty, had offered her a strength deeper than any weapon, and for the first time in her warrior life, she felt seen, she felt protected, she felt valued for more than her usefulness. Later that night, as the flames from the small stove flickered softly across the cabin walls, she lifted her gaze toward Eli with an expression she had never allowed herself to show before. Vulnerability mixed with longing, strength tangled with fear. "Eli," she whispered, "I do not want to just stay here." He looked up, meeting her eyes with a calmness that steadied her breath. "What do you want?" he asked gently. She inhaled deeply, as if preparing her heart for a truth she had buried under years of abandonment and bruised pride. "I want warmth. I want a life with you." Her large hand reached out, covering Eli's with surprising gentleness, her rough palm cradling his weathered fingers. "Touch me." It wasn't a plea, nor the bargaining tone of someone desperate. It was the voice of a woman finally brave enough to admit she desired connection, not out of need, but out of choice. Eli did not rush. He raised his hand slowly and placed it against her cheek, the touch feather-light, full of respect and unspoken devotion. "Only if this is truly what you want," he murmured. "I do," she answered without hesitation. Two souls that the world had once cast aside finally reached toward each other, no longer broken, but beginning to heal in a tenderness neither had believed possible. Dawn broke softly over the horizon the next morning, spilling golden light across the wooden cabin and touching her face with gentle warmth. She opened her eyes with a sense of peace she hadn't felt since childhood, a peace that radiated from her chest rather than her surroundings. Eli moved quietly in the small kitchen, boiling water, his limp causing a familiar tilt in his stance but never slowing him down. When he heard her stir, he turned with a soft expression that held no possession, only care. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. She nodded, a faint blush warming her cheeks. "Yes, better than I have in years." Her bandaged legs still ached, but something inside her felt different now, not just hope, but the will to rebuild herself. Eli walked toward her with a pair of sturdy wooden crutches he had crafted with meticulous care, each notch sanded smooth, each grip shaped to fit her strong hands. "These are for you," he said simply. She stared at them, emotion tightening her throat. "You never saw me as a burden." With a deep breath, she pushed herself upright and gripped the crutches, her muscles tightening like a drawn bow. She forced her legs beneath her, leaning heavily on the wooden supports, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Eli stood close, not touching, but ready to catch her if she faltered. She rose an inch, then another, until she was fully standing for the first time since her injuries. Sweat broke across her brow, but her eyes burned with fierce triumph. "I did it," she said, breathless but proud. Eli smiled, a warm, genuine curve of his lips. "I knew you would." In the days that followed, she practiced walking across the yard, each step deliberate and powerful, reclaiming her strength one slow stride at a time. When the desert wind pushed through her long black hair, she felt like a warrior reborn, not defined by broken bones, but by the unwavering fire inside her. Eli watched her progress with quiet admiration, offering help only when she asked, giving space when she needed to prove her resilience. One evening, as the fire glowed a deep amber in the stove, she rested her hand over her heart, feeling it pound with something almost overwhelming. "Eli," she said softly, her voice trembling not from weakness but from honesty. "I thought I was shattered. I thought my life had ended when they abandoned me." Eli reached out and placed his hand over hers, barely touching yet anchoring her in a way nothing else ever had. "You are not broken," he whispered. "You never were." For the first time in months, she laughed, not bitterly, not guardedly, but with a full, radiant joy that filled the room like sudden sunlight. "No," she said, smiling through tears. "I never was. I just needed a place where someone saw me as whole." Eli squeezed her hand gently, a promise wrapped in silence, a vow made not with words but presence. Outside, the desert was still harsh, still wild and endless, but inside the small cabin, two spirits once bruised by the world had begun to stitch themselves back together. As autumn crept across the Arizona land, painting the desert in pale golds and muted browns, her body began to shift in ways she couldn't explain. It started with exhaustion, a heaviness that settled in her bones each morning. Then came the dizziness, the strange fluttering sensation deep within her belly. Eli noticed these changes before she said a word, offering her tea without asking questions, watching over her with quiet concern. One morning, as she steadied herself with her crutches, she stopped abruptly, pressing a hand against her stomach. "Eli?" Her voice trembled, not with fear but with bewilderment. He rushed to her side, guiding her gently to the bench on the porch. She took several slow breaths, then whispered words that seemed to reshape the air around them. "I think I might be carrying a child." Eli froze, every part of him suspended between shock and rising joy. She looked at him with wide amber eyes filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. A warrior knows when her body changes, and this time it is not pain. Eli knelt in front of her, his hands enveloping hers as if they were holding something sacred. For a long moment he could not speak, could only feel the overwhelming warmth swelling inside him, a feeling that stitched together every lonely year of his life. Finally, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You are not broken," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "You never were." Her eyes shimmered, tears gathering but not falling, because for the first time in her life she understood she was being loved without conditions or expectations. She exhaled slowly, her hand drifting to her belly as a new, unfamiliar hope settled in her chest. "Eli," she said softly, her voice full of awe. "A child born of an Apache warrior and a man with a limp." She laughed, the sound warm and alive. "Maybe he or she will be fierce." Eli chuckled under his breath, his eyes shining. "Our child will have their mother's heart." And beneath the vast desert sky, wrapped in a moment that felt like a blessing, two souls once cast aside realized they were no longer just survivors. They were becoming a family. Winter drifted through the desert with a gentleness neither of them had expected, and by the time spring began whispering along the horizon, the Apache woman had transformed in ways that felt almost miraculous. Her legs, once twisted and shattered, had grown stronger with each passing week, guided by determination fiercer than any storm. At first she leaned heavily on the crutches Eli had crafted, taking careful steps across the hardened earth. But soon her strides became longer, steadier, driven by the rising strength within her body and the growing life inside her womb. She walked around the ranch, steadying herself on fences, running her hand along the smooth wooden rails as if claiming new territory with each touch. One morning she stepped outside as usual and stopped in her tracks. There, fixed to the tallest wooden post, hung a new sign carved by Eli's careful hand. Rough-edged but proud, the letters read, "Decker Ranch." The wind carried the soft clacking of wood, a sound like a promise being spoken aloud for the first time. Eli emerged from behind the house, leaning on his cane with a quiet smile that warmed her more than the rising sun. "When did you make this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion she could no longer hide. "While you were sleeping," he replied. "I wanted you to see it first." She approached the sign slowly, placing her strong hand against the carved letters, feeling the ridges under her fingertips like the beating of a new heart. Each cut of the knife felt like a piece of belief, a foundation forming beneath her feet. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "I do not feel abandoned anymore. Here, I have a home." Eli stepped beside her, their shoulders brushing in a soft, unspoken closeness. "We were both cast aside," he said. "Not because we were broken, only because we hadn't yet found the right person." She turned to him, her fierce features softened by a tenderness she never imagined she could feel. "And now, have you found that person?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Eli nodded without hesitation, his eyes steady and full of quiet truth. "Yes, it is you." The desert wind swept across the yard, nudging the ranch sign as if sealing those words into the dry air. She stepped closer, placing her hand over his chest where his heartbeat thumped slow and strong beneath her palm. "Then I will stay too. Not because I need shelter, but because I love you." Eli covered her hand with his own, pressing it softly against his cheek, a gesture full of reverence rather than desire. "And I love you, more than I ever thought I could love anything again." Under the vast sky, with the mountains watching in silent witness, two lives once torn apart had finally woven into something whole. Their love was quiet but powerful, like the desert after rain, bringing life to places that once knew only dust. The months that followed brought a calm joy neither had experienced before. She tended the small herd, her movements confident and grounded, no longer defined by the wounds that once threatened to end her life. Eli worked beside her, limping but steady, carving new posts, repairing old fences, building the home they were shaping together. He often paused just to watch her, the way she carried her strength with pride instead of shame, the way her laughter echoed across the yard like music. As her belly grew round, she walked with one hand resting protectively over the growing child, her other hand brushing Eli's shoulder whenever they passed each other, a small touch that said more than words ever could. In the evenings they sat on the porch, watching the sky melt into oranges and purples, their silence filled with peace instead of emptiness. She would lean her head against his, whispering dreams of the life they would give their child. When the first warm rains of summer swept across the land, she felt a shift inside her, a pull, a tightening, a signal older than language. Eli supported her as she breathed through the waves of pain, guiding her gently back into the cabin where the fire crackled softly. Hours passed in a haze of effort and determination, her powerful hands gripping Eli's as if drawing strength from the core of his heart. At last, in the quiet hours before dawn, the cry of a newborn filled the small house. A strong, fierce little life with dark eyes and a tiny fist curled like a warrior's. She held the child close to her chest, tears slipping down her face as Eli touched the baby's small hand with trembling awe. "We made a family," she whispered. "You and I, two people the world thought were broken." Eli smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Nothing broken here. Only love. Only beginnings." And so beneath the endless stretch of desert sky, surrounded by wind-carved hills and sun-warmed earth, a new life began, one built not on pity or need, but on strength, choice, and unwavering devotion. Their home was simple, their days quiet, but every moment carried the weight of healing and the warmth of belonging. The Apache woman no longer feared abandonment. Eli no longer walked through life alone. Their child would grow surrounded by courage, tenderness, and the unshakable truth that love is not given to the unbroken but to the brave. In the final glow of sunset, Eli held his family close and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude to the land that had once felt so empty. Now it was full. And for the first time in a lifetime of wandering, all three of them were exactly where they were meant to be. Forever held not by fate or tribe or war, but by a love strong enough to rebuild even the most shattered pieces.